Hey DJ Tech Tools, today we're going to talk about the remix decks. So a lot of people have said about the remix decks, oh man, that's just a marketing feature. Nobody actually uses those live. And we got a great question on the website in our suggest an article section, which said, hey, can you please show us some ways that we can actually use the remix decks live? Well, believe it or not, there are a few really good ways in which you can use remix decks in Traktor live on stage as a real DJ, and today I'm going to show them to you. So in Traktor there are 4 decks, 1, 2, 3, 4. These can be used to play 4 songs, but you can also change any one of these decks into something called a remix deck, which gives you 4 more decks. And each of these decks has a bunch of slots where you can save songs. So think of them as super powerful decks. Now, why would you want to have a remix deck here rather than a regular deck which just plays 1 song? Well, here, let's show you. The very first thing I really like to do with these remix decks is load some very basic kick and snare samples. So here I've got a kick, 2 different flavors depending on what I want, and 2 different snares. And what I'll show you is that in the remix deck, you can actually quantize the deck, that's this little guy here, to down to a quarter note. Whereas up here in sync quantizes to a whole note or 1 count. Why do you care? Well, let's say you've got a song running in the background and you want to layer a little beat underneath it and play it by hand. But you're not Jeremy Ellis, so your timing isn't perfect. Well, some samples in the remix decks are perfect for this. So because it's quantized to a quarter note, you can actually play a decently interesting beat that will always be on point underneath any breakdown. And that's the first way you can use the remix decks creatively on stage, is during a breakdown, or even if you don't have a breakdown. Let's say you've got a kick going and you just cut out the kick, create a little breakbeat moment. Cool, now that I just went into is the second creative way I like to use the remix decks, which are for little snare fills. So use these same snares, but now with an effect on it, probably an echo of some kind. You probably won't want to do it too much, but every once in a while, to be able to reach over and just grab a little snare and create a nice echo filled out drum build, for me is really fun and actually really useful in a set, especially if you just want to accent the downbeat. So just before you bring in the beat, something like that. Subtle, but really effective. So that's the second way you can use a remix deck really effectively, is by doing little snare or hi-hat fills with effects just on that sound, which is why the remix decks are special. I can isolate my effects per channel. So right now, remember, I've got a kick and a snare. You can hear I've only got the effect on my snare. Here it's dry. And now here's the snare with that effect. And a nice new feature with the S8 is that I can actually do an effect send, and as you heard, change the amount of the effect that's sent from that channel. So here's completely dry, and a little bit, and way too much. So that's really nice. You can graduate the amount of effects. Next up, one of my favorite ways to use the remix deck is to have a ride or a hi-hat rolling in the background across all my tracks. So here I've got 2 options. We've got a basic ride. This particular ride has a little bit of a snare in it, which is nice, or a standard backbeat hi-hat. This one I really like. You can hear it's just a backbeat hi-hat. So some tracks like this guy, if we skip forward, don't actually have that element in the song. But if you're the kind of house DJ or the kind of DJ that always wants to have a certain characteristic to your mix, having that element ready to go creates this nice continuity in your mix. And then we can pop in the effects every once in a while, just for dramatic effect. Maybe we'll switch over to the ride now. I really like keeping this ride rolling, especially if we only route the peak filter to the ride. Check out this. So let's put a peak filter on this guy. You can do these little sweeps. Pretty cool. So that is the third way that I like to use the remix decks. It's keeping a ride or a hi-hat behind your decks. And I'll keep this going for at least 2 or 3 songs to create some continuity in my mix. Moving on. Next one is low end support. So some of these tracks, like this edit that I did right here, I gotta be honest, doesn't quite have the kick that it needs for some clubs, because it's from an older techno track from the 90s. For that reason, both I and a lot of producers will keep a nice loop of just a solid kick going. And they'll layer that underneath the other tracks, just to really punch up the whole mix. And anytime a track comes in that's got a little bit of a weaker low end, boom, the whole thing has some more kick. Kind of want to get rid of that, that extra kick there, so I'm just going to loop this whole remix deck. So now we just have that nice steady kick. There it is. And I know this loop, I've heard it in the club, I know that the low end sounds really good, so anytime I need a little extra oomph, you just drop that guy in. Moving on. The next really interesting way to use the remix decks is to keep a loop going for your whole set or parts of your sets. So if we back it up and we go into deck B, we've got this cool tech house moment going on here. And I like this loop, it's really cool. In particular, it works great over this track. Really like these two. But I want to free up this deck. I don't want to have it tied up by a whole loop. So check it out, it's super easy to switch into my remix deck. I'm going to go ahead and hit capture, select the deck I want to capture, and just copy that down. So now we can start them going. And now I've got that loop over here in deck D. So as I said, the remix decks are essentially 4 extra decks. So I've copied the loop from deck B into my remix deck, and now at any time I can bring that back in, and I've freed up deck B to do other things. So I'll keep that loop going, mix in a new song, and then later on down the line, if I want to reintroduce that element, I still have it. I didn't have to get rid of it to make room for a different song. Last, but certainly not least, one of my favorite ways to use the remix decks is subtle, but I think probably the most professional of all. This really adds a production quality level to your DJ mixes. So something you're probably already doing a lot, we turn these effects off, is adding little effects builds to your set. So maybe you'll drop out the low end, bring in some little effects, bring them out, and bring the low end back in. Cool, super clean. Now if you want to take it up a notch, let's try dropping a little bit of a splash. Turn off that loop. So a little bit of a splash on the 1. So let's try that again and we'll see how this sounds. So we've got our beat going, our crowd's getting into it. We want to create a little tension and a little excitement on the fly. So we'll drop out the lows, add a little effects. timing wasn't as good on that one. Let's try it one more time. But the idea is that we just bring in those effects, and right on the one or the release, we drop that side-chained noise effect. And this makes the whole thing really sound like it was in the original production and not just you up there goofing around with your tractor effects. So that's the fifth and almost final way that I think you can use the remix decks in a real DJ set. Load up some splashes, or in this case, sidechain noise, to drop on the one for a little added effect. Instant techno. All these ideas are ways in which you can use the remix decks with any technology you already have, be it this controller or any other. Here's one final way you can reuse the remix decks in an extra creative way if you have the MIDI Fighter Twister. The MIDI Fighter Twister is the only sequencer out there that will actually send out notes and trigger drums in the remix deck so you can sequence rhythms straight from the controller. So I'll go ahead and start up my sequencer and select a pattern and a rhythm. And what should happen if we start up this deck, is that I can go ahead and trigger that same snare that I was triggering earlier, but instead of me having to play it manually, I can trigger it automatically in time with the other beats. A little bit of technical wizardry. We can actually do lighter hits here, maybe some little fills. That's pretty cool. Now I can sequence all 4 of the channels inside of the remix decks. So I'm going to do the same thing with a kick. Just bring that nice kick underneath the whole bit. This button up here allows me to select from different kick sounds. I like that one. That's really good on the low end. And mute or filter these guys out. So there you have it, folks. 6, in the end, 6 super creative ways that you can use the Tractor remix decks on stage in a real DJ set, doing things that will really improve the sound of your mix, not just for marketing material. Hope you enjoyed this video. For more just like it, visit us on the web at djtechtools.com.